All right, well, welcome everybody. It's 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Thomas Hill with CD Technology, and I appreciate y'all joining me on this webinar, or if you're checking in with us later, listening to the recording. So today we're going to be talking about disaster recovery. It's not about disasters, it's about downtime. So this is one of our monthly 30-minute webinars. We try to produce some content that we feel like is of interest to businesses all over East Tennessee and beyond, to keep them safe from cyber criminals and to make them more productive. So again, disaster recovery. So I want you to think about what would happen if you got into the office at 8:30 this morning or whatever time you get in the office and all your computers are down. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? First thing is how long is it going to take to get back up? And, well, what am I going to do? And what work am I missing? Does payroll need to be processed today? Or do we have customers that are going to get mad because we can't help them? Are we not going to have good cash flow because, invoices aren't getting sent on time? These are all real things. And this is what we call, a disaster of downtime. And so that's why it's important that we look at all aspects of this. When a lot of people hear disaster recovery, they think the big things. So I just heard on the news this morning that Venezuela had an earthquake, and unfortunately, a lot of people lost their lives in it, which means that also a lot of businesses are going to be struggling because they've lost all of their all of their equipment, and they don't have access to customer files. And a lot of people think of that as a disaster. Here in East Tennessee, we had the fires back in 2017, I believe, in Gatlinburg, and there were many companies that lost all of their infrastructure and access to their data. Those are the things that we kind of hear about when we hear disaster. But the crux of the matter is that a lot more people are more likely to have smaller disasters that happen much more often. Okay. Thank heavens, it's been almost 10 years since we've had those giant fires here in East Tennessee, and so hopefully it'll be another 100+ years before we have them again. But I can guarantee you that somebody here in East Tennessee today that's running a business has got a server that has failed. Guarantee you that somebody woke up this morning, got into the office, and they started to access their data on either their local server or even a cloud-based server, and that information is gone for some reason. I can guarantee you that there's an employee in somebody's company that has accidentally deleted an entire SharePoint folder that's important. Or perhaps they even did it maliciously. I can guarantee you that there is some sort of a ransom attack that's happening right now, right here in East Tennessee. So these are things that I can guarantee that are happening, and you're much more likely to be hit by something like this. And so that's kind of what we wanted to kind of talk about today. One of the things that you really need to calculate is, what does it cost my company to be down? If you have 10 employees and your fully loaded hourly cost of those employees, and the fully loaded cost is, what those employees obviously, collect in payroll, but also the taxes that go along with it, the training, everything else. It's not terribly unusual for, those people to cost, 30, 35, 40 or even more dollars an hour. If you've got 10 employees, you're easily looking at $3,000 a day in just payroll costs, and then you put in on top of that the cost to go back and possibly pay overtime charges to get things back up and running. Of course, reputational damage. So easily, even just a small company could lose thousands of dollars every single day because of downtime. So that's what we want to kind of talk about is, how does an organization get prepared? 3 things that you need to look at. How long can you afford to be down? How much data can you afford to lose? And then, finally, who's responsible when the systems fail? Who is in charge? So let's kind of look at these. So first of all, how long can you be down? So your RTO is your recovery time objective. Okay. So in other words, every business has a different tolerance, for how long will it take to get your systems back up and running. If you're a small company, then maybe 24 hours is fine. Like if your server goes down today, if you've got a good IT company and they're able to get a clone from the day before and get you back up and running by the next morning, perhaps that's fine for you. If you are, let's say you are a credit union, perhaps mission critical operations is going to be much more important, especially healthcare thing. Accounting, CPA services, maybe they don't need to be back up in an hour, but if we're in the middle of tax season, they probably want to be up, in a couple of hours. They certainly don't want to be down long at all, and certainly a full day of outage might be a serious issue. So you have to kind of evaluate that, and think about how it is that you're going to operate, and if you can operate that long without losing customers. The next question that we're going to ask is, how much data can you lose? Well, what does that mean? Here at CD Technology, we generally do 24-hour backups. What that means is that the vast majority of our customers have a cloud-based backup that happens every single night. And so, if you end up losing, so let's say one of our customers ends up losing their server, at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, we can go back to the backup from Tuesday night and have you back up and running with really probably no loss at all. But if you've worked all day Tuesday and then the server goes out at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday, well, that means we're going to have to go back to our last backup, which was going to be on Monday afternoon, which means that you've probably got about 24 hours worth of data loss there. Again, for most companies, that's probably okay. But again, if you are running certainly a banking industry, a credit union, something like that, you probably need to have more like instantaneous backups. You need to be able to make sure that you can recover within the last hour or certain or maybe perhaps even within minutes. So again, these are all things that you kind of need to look at as the owner, manager, whatever it is, and determine what is important. How long can you having to have accurate data? And then finally, the last question is who takes charge during the outage? So again, let's say we've got a server that goes down Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. What does it look like? Who gets contacted first? Do you make the call to your internal IT team if you have an internal IT team, or do you escalate it to the external team? How do you communicate with employees to let them know, hey, this is just a minor bump in the road, this is not major? If it is a ransomware attack, that is kind of more of a major thing. It's going to take a little more time. Let's pretend like that's the case. How are you communicating with your employees? How are you going to communicate with your customers to let them know that you've got an incident going on? If it is a cyber attack, if you have cyber liability insurance, you need to make sure that you alert your cyber liability insurance company and let them know that you have an issue and that you're going to need help getting through it, because they're going to be the first ones that are going to determine whether they're going to cover expenses or not, which is why it's important to make sure that they're in on what needs to happen. So, when we're talking about, downtime, there's 5 things that you kind of want to layer. Okay. And the first one is layer 1 is having reliable backups. The very first thing, I mean, pretty much no matter what happens, it doesn't matter whether it's the earthquake, the fires, a down server, or a ransomware attack. One of the first things that you're going to want to make sure that you have a great understanding on is the backups. And you're going to want to make sure that, you get good access to those backups. And again, we kind of go back to what we talked about before. Is it okay? Do you have to have backups, every 5 minutes, every 1 hour, every 4 hours, every 24 hours? Is weekly backups okay for your company? It might be, but that's what you need to make sure that you have in place, because with almost any disaster recovery situation, you're going to start with the backup. The next layer is to stop the threats before they even cause downtime. Some people could probably even argue that could be the first layer, but that's going to be the second one, is having a good foundation in place, a good level of endpoint security, having good advisors to make sure that they can kind of let you know what you should be looking at and what you shouldn't be looking at. Number 3 is cloud resilience. I talk to a lot of customers and they say, oh, well, all my stuff is in the cloud, so I don't need endpoint security. I don't have to worry about backing it up. The problem is a lot of the big companies have kind of led you astray a little bit, to be honest with you, because they've said to you, oh, well, we've got these data centers that are redundant, and Microsoft and Google, they're great examples. If you go through and read the fine print of what you signed when you signed up to do your SharePoint website, or whatever data that you're hosting, it says on there that yes, they do have data centers, and they do have redundant data centers, but it's for their protection. It's not for your protection. So if you have, let's say, a disgruntled employee that goes through and deletes an important SharePoint folder, you can reach out to Microsoft and get them to help you recover it. But it is not a fast process at all. In fact, if anybody has tried to reach out to Microsoft, they generally don't even respond to you for 24 to 48 hours. So can you be without your data, in that amount of time while you're waiting for Microsoft to get back to you? That's why we talk about cloud resilience and making sure that you have third-party companies that can do backups for you. Again, the customers that we have in place, that have our services, we have a third-party backup company for both Microsoft and G Suite, so that if something happens, you can open a ticket with us and we'll have your data back in as little as 5 minutes, because we have access to our own third-party backups. And so again, that's another area that you're going to want to think about. Documentation, it's great to talk about, disaster recovery. But the problem is if you don't have it properly documented, then people don't know what to do. And if you're out sick that day and you're the one that's in charge of, what happens with a disaster, and you're not available to try and guide, then, who else does that fall on? And so that's why it's important to have procedures documented. And then lastly, testing. This is probably one of the bigger ones that's really important, and that is pretend like you've lost your server to a ransom attack, or pretend like you've had an actual natural disaster, a fire where the server was incinerated or something of that nature. Practice that. I'm not saying you should set your server on fire. Let's not do that now. But what I'm saying is unplug the server and let your team go through that process. Make sure that they know how to pull up the documentation and what steps they should follow and who they should contact. You're gonna find it to be very eye-opening, and in the case of a real disaster, you'll be much more prepared. Think of it as a fire alarm, fire drill back in high school, middle school. We all remember, the fire alarm getting pulled, and we all got up from our desks and we all walked out to the lot, and everybody called all clear, and then we were able to go back inside. And that's really what we're talking about here, is to just have some actual testing in place. Okay, going back to backups. Backups are probably, again, the number one most important thing that you need to make sure that you have a good handle on. You have to make sure the backups are automated. I cannot tell you how many times I've talked with customers or potential customers. They say, well, we've got this process where we stick in a thumb drive, and then we copy over a couple of files, and then I take that thumb drive home. And again, I guess that's a process, but unless it's automated, there are things that can happen. So again, if you're the one person that's in charge of doing that backup, and you suddenly end up having some sort of a medical emergency that puts you in the hospital for a couple of weeks, well, now nobody has done that backup for a couple of weeks. Monitoring, even if you do have it completely automated, you need to make sure that kind of the continuous monitoring and the recovery testing are kind of the same thing. You need to make sure that somebody is watching to make sure that the backups are actually happening, whether they're automated or whether somebody's manually doing them. And then you need to make sure that somebody is testing them. Excuse me a second. You need to make sure that you pull a backup and pretend like, again, practice, what if we have to restore, what is the process for that? Do you have a spare computer that you can restore it on? Does the restore actually work? I cannot tell you how many times we've had potential clients reach out to us saying, well, we thought we had everything kind of under control, but we've got this backup, and our server went down, and unfortunately the backup doesn't seem to be working. Can you help us? Sadly, it's too late. If they had contacted us, a week before, we could have gotten good backups in place, and we would have been able to help them then. But finding out that you have a corrupt backup is not the time that I'm even able to help at that point. So, again, there should be, processes and procedures in place for your backups. And then kind of moving on a little bit to cybersecurity, modern disasters begin with just one click. Sadly enough, again, it kind of goes back to the ransomware and, ACH fraud and all that kind of thing. Email hacks. Those are all things that you're much more likely to have an issue with than you are, a fire or an earthquake or something like that. And so make sure that you have the basics in place, have good endpoint protection on your systems with a good security operations center in place for that matter. In fact, I'm going to show you a picture here, I believe. One second. So I'm going to switch over. So this morning we had a couple of customers that are having some issues because the website that they use, a vendor that they use, has been hacked by a fake CAPTCHA. And so this is a great example right here of, this looks like it's something that could be real, but it is not. And this is going to install fake, well, not fake, but actual remote software on a computer. And, this is a great example right here of, just a couple of wrong clicks are going to mess up somebody's day. So I kind of wanted to show you this because this is something that's happening right now. And so, if you're seeing this kind of a CAPTCHA kind of thing where it's asking you to do all of these steps here, as opposed to most of the time we're, used to like pressing all of the, all the bicycles in the squares or all the stop signs in the squares or whatever it is. This is an actual fake CAPTCHA that's designed to install remote software. And so, I want to show this to you because this is a brand new hack that's going on right now. But anyway, getting back to our presentation, endpoint protection with a security operations center. The only reason that we even knew that fake CAPTCHA was going on is because our company that we use, Huntress, is our security operations center, they were able to alert on this in less than 5 minutes and let us know that there was an issue. And they actually stopped it and notified us. We did the remediation, and so far we've got a customer that's up and running. So, but they could have been down, and so having good endpoint protection with Security Operations Center in place is important. Having multi-factor authentication, 2FA, it's not good enough to just have passwords anymore. And then this is a big one, security awareness training. It's great to do your yearly security awareness training, but we recommend more than that. The vast majority of our customers actually go through fake phishing schemes and that kind of thing, in addition to their yearly training. These are all important things to kind of keep in place because, again, the better security that you have, the less likely that you're going to have some sort of a disaster. So let's see here. The most overlooked step in disaster recovery, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, and that is testing. And so, I know we're kind of reiterating ourselves here, but do the fire drill, pull the fire alarm, not theoretically pull the fire alarm, pull the plug from your server. Make sure that your team can follow the systems and processes that you have in place. Look and see what worked, what didn't work, and make modifications to it and move on. And then lastly, we've developed a business readiness scorecard. So if you're not sure if your company is ready for disaster recovery or not, we've got a scorecard here that we can email out to anyone that is taking a look at this webinar. Just simply let us know that you're interested in having it. But really, the real question is it's not what happens if we have a disaster. Really, what you should be asking is, how quickly can we get back up and working? Because again, a disaster is going to come in a whole bunch of different ways, and that's really the name of the game here: is how quickly can we get back up and working? So again, my name is Thomas Hill. I'm with CD Technology. We take care of over 120 businesses here in the Tennessee and connecting states region, and we want to make sure that not only are you secure from cyber criminals, but that you are making money by not having downtime. And we try to make sure that your team stays up and working. And that's what we do. We keep you all productive. And so if you want more information from me or have additional questions, feel free to send me an email at thill@cdtechnology.com, or you can give me a call at 865-895-4423. That goes directly to my desk phone. And I appreciate everybody, and make it a great day today. Thank you so much.